Welcome back to the channel, guys. This time we're comparing two Caymans from the 981 generation. We are currently in a 2015 Cayman GTS, and we're going to compare this against its bigger brother, the GT4. A GTS like this one goes for around $60,000 to $80,000 nowadays with a manual transmission, whereas the GT4 still commands around $100,000. So naturally, the question is the GT4 worth the extra $20,000 to $40,000 as a driver's car? So a few specs about the GTS. This has the 3.4 liter naturally aspirated flat six engine. Same engine as in the Cayman S, but this one's been retuned to make 340 horsepower and 280 pound-feet of torque. We have the 6-speed manual transmission as standard. You can also get it with a 7-speed PDK. This has Porsche sports exhaust, Porsche torque vectoring, which is the LSD, and this particular car has been spec'd out with the X73 sport suspension. It's a fixed spring and damper setup, and it should be actually stiffer than the PASM setup in the stiffer setting. This car weighs right around 3,000 pounds, so it is going to be a little bit lighter than that GT4, but obviously less power, less aero, less brakes. Unfortunately, we are on some Michelin Pilot Sport 4 all-season tires, not the ideal tire choice for hard driving. So let's see how this GTS drives first, and then we'll compare it to its bigger brother. You can hear the sound of a 991.2 GT3 in the distance. Everything feels high quality. There's maybe a couple of squeaks and rattles, but this car has over 77,000 miles. The owners, Carmen and Aaron, bought this car for, I think, under $60,000, right around that price, which makes sense given that this one has more miles than the average GTS. This flat six makes a great sound, lots of induction noise. Steering is very, very light. I don't know how much of that is due to these all-season tires, but I know for a fact that the 718 or 982 generation Cayman, the later generation, has better steering feel than this. This also has really long gearing with the 6-speed manual. Second gear goes to over 80 miles an hour. Really good turn in. With this steering wheel, it just doesn't load up in the corners the way I want it to. It feels a tad numb. But I do like how the steering ratio isn't overly quick, which means I can dial in very precise amounts of steering input. Easy to heel toe, as are all naturally aspirated Porsches. Brakes feel good. We're just on basically just standard Cayman S brakes. The GTS never got the larger brakes from the GT4. The X73 suspension doing a pretty good job here. Feels nice and firm, well damped. First gear. Such long gearing, that's a bummer. I wish the second gear only went up to around 70, 72 miles an hour instead of over 80. It's still such a well-balanced car though. The inputs, minus the light steering. The shifter feels really good. Not as good as a GT car shifter, but still has a nice action. Plenty of torque in the mid-range from this engine. You don't necessarily have to wind it out, but when you have a almost 8,000 RPM redline, why wouldn't you want to? That's where this long gearing just, I feel, is a detriment to the overall driving pleasure. We can't even get out of second gear here. The Porsche torque vectoring LSD does a really good job at putting the power down I'll give it that. I've driven 981 Caymans without this option, and you know, they have inherently good balance and traction because they are mid-engine, but when you really push those rear tires to the limit, you do get a little bit of one tire fire, and that's not the case here with PTV. It's an absolute must if you're looking for a really razor sharp driving experience in your Cayman. Still a lot of fun though, this GTS. It's still a very technically competent car. It does everything well. I just wish that gearing was shorter. That really would transform this car. Really good front end response. Suspension's really good. X73. I might actually prefer this over PASM. I feel like PASM in the softer setting is a little too wallowy in the corners, but in the stiffer setting it just almost feels a tad overdamped. That's a general blanket statement that doesn't necessarily apply to every Porsche with PASM, but what I found in the past in non-GT Porsches with PASM, they can never get the setting just right between the softer and the stiffer settings. I think the X73 suspension feels better for hard driving. For daily driving, you probably still want the PASM. Since we have such long gearing, let's just do one little straight line pull here, so we at least can get the engine out to its red line a couple of times. First gear. It's still a quick car, but it would be quicker and more fun with shorter gearing. All right, I'll get off my soapbox now. And it's funny because that GT4 we're about to drive has the same gearing as this, but maybe with the extra 50 horsepower, it can make use of this long gearing a little bit better. Let's find out. As an everyday drivable Porsche Cayman though, this thing's pretty fantastic. Very few complaints. It's not supposed to be a hardcore track special. But that GT4 is, so let's see how it compares. All right, so we're now in the 2016 981 generation GT4. We're powered by a 3.8 liter flat six engine, naturally aspirated, carried over from the 991.1 generation Carrera S. It's been detuned just a tad to make 385 horsepower and right around 300 pound-feet of torque. This car weighs a little bit more than the GTS. I think it's close to 3,100 to 3,200 pounds. Right away, the interior feels a lot more special. It feels actually better put together. I don't know if that's just because this only has 17,000 miles, but there's fewer squeaks and rattles. Everything feels just a little bit more solid. I love this interior spec. The owner mentioned that this is about the most highly spec'd out GT4 he's ever seen. Love the stitched leather, the door straps, the carbon, just a really nice place to be. And we have this Alcantara wrapped steering wheel, which I think is the right move for a GT car. All right, let's get right to it. The engine definitely makes a lot more sound, more mechanical whirs and buzzes. We're gonna open up this valved exhaust, put it into sport mode, and the PASM dampers in the stiffer setting. We have the Porsche carbon ceramic brakes as well. Basically a fully optioned out GT4. Let's see how it drives. Wow. Very first thing I'm noticing, far superior steering feel. We are on a much stickier tire. It's a Michelin Cup 2, so that could be part of the reason, but the way this steering loads up in the corners is just brilliant. Wow, the brake pedal feels a lot better as well. It's firm, easy to modulate. This front end is so much sharper. Tires is definitely a big part of it, but that's not the only thing. This suspension setup is just far better. And it soaks up the bumps better than the X73 Sport suspension in that GTS. I just get the sense that the suspension is doing more of the work, whereas in that GTS, the chassis was soaking up a lot of the bumps and imperfections in the road. Wow, fantastic. It's such a huge difference. Driving these two cars in a vacuum, you know, I was always really impressed with both, but back to back, it is a huge difference. Even this manual transmission in the GT4 feels a lot more solid and mechanical. Everything just feels like it's cut from a different cloth. First gear. 7,800 RPM redline. It is not the most special engine in the world. Having driven a number of GT3s and even a GT4 RS very recently, this engine pales in comparison. But it's still an excellent engine. It revs high, it gives you a linear torque curve, really energetic top end. It's just not quite as sharp as a GT3 engine. So much grip, it's fantastic. Easy to heel toe, great throttle response. What a car. The 981 GT4 is still a benchmark by every sense of the term. The steering feel, the shifter feel, the brakes, the throttle response, the mid-engine balance, the traction. It's still so damn good, even 8 years after it was released. The original GT4 is still a fantastic driver's car. And I hate to say it, but the Cayman GTS pales in comparison. Something about the way these GT cars are made and engineered, it's just something altogether different. The brakes are even better. The front end is way, way sharper. I can really tell what the front tires are doing, how much load I'm putting on them in these corners, and that gives me the ability to attack corners harder because I can actually feel where the limits of the car are. There's even less squeaks and rattles from the interior. It actually feels like it's built better. Again, much lower mileage than that GTS we drove, but wow. The GT4 is the gold standard 6-figure pure driver's car for a reason. It has been ever since it was released. It still has that annoying long gearing issue with this manual transmission. You can't even get this one in a PDK. And yeah, I just wish it was geared shorter. I wish the second gear went up to around 72, 73 miles an hour. It would just make this excellent car feel even sharper, even more enjoyable to drive. This 3.8 liter engine does make use of this long gearing better than that 3.4 liter, but it's still maybe the only weakness I can think of with a GT4, outside of the relative lack of engine character, but still amazing engine. So in conclusion, you get what you pay for. Imagine that. With the GT4, you're just getting that much sharper of a driving experience. This freaking clown in front of me, ruining my otherwise amazing comparison, if I do say so myself. So is the extra $30,000 to $40,000 worth it? Abso-freaking-lutely. The GT products, again, are just cut from a different cloth. They may look very similar inside and out, but the way they drive is just so much better in every single way. And that's not to take away from the GTS. I think in the GTS's price point of $60,000 to $80,000, it is one of the best driving cars you can get. But once you cross that six-figure threshold, it opens up a whole new world, and this GT4 still stands at the top of that $100,000 mountain. So big thank you to the owners of that GTS, Carmen and Aaron, and by the owner of this GT4. Let me know what other comparisons you'd like to see in the future, and I'll try to make them happen. If you're in the Bay Area and you have a car you'd like me to review, please reach out. Thank you all for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.